Welcome everybody, this is Christian from Sterling Knight Gamers, and I'm going to try to do another Star Wars Armada ranking. There are so many squadrons out there for both uniques, heroes, and the standard, and I'm going to go ahead and try to rank them. I divided them up in two ways. I'm going to have the heroes in one ranking, and then I'm going to do the standard and the unique non-hero squadrons. I'm going to go ahead and rank those together, and it actually end up being the same number for each rather than this crazy top 30, top 40 ranking. So, number one for the Rebels is the A-Wing. It is cheap, it is fast, it's good versus ships with that black dye, and it also has a counter too. Very useful. It's only 11 points, it's very affordable. You can use them relatively independently. Even if you're not using activate squadron commands, you can still send them out. They're so fast that they can get ahead of those ships and where they're going to be. You can tie things down with them. You can lock them down, and then if they try to attack you, you're dishing damage out even if you don't get to activate. 4 health can sometimes go pretty quickly, but for their price, they're incredibly useful. Next, I'm going to have the YT-2400. It's speed 4, almost as fast as the A-Wing, but has 6 health, which is really useful. Has 4 anti-squadron dice and a black anti-squadron. It's rogue. Doesn't have bomber, but again, with that black dice, you're going to have a 75% chance of doing 1 damage to it. That's great. It's 16 points. It's relatively expensive. To be perfectly honest, I would use it more often if it wasn't so expensive in the real world that you would have to buy a whole pack just to get one of them at a time. So that's one downside of it in real life, but in terms of ranking, I think it's incredibly useful. My third favorite Rebel squadron is Rogue Squadron. It's the souped up X-Wing squadron. It's 1 point more. It's 14 points. It still has bomber. It loses escort, but it gains rogue. All the other stats are the same. Speed 3, 5 hull, 4 anti-squadron, red, anti-ship. That red is definitely a downside, but with Bomber Command Center, it definitely gets a lot better, and it's just so useful for 1 point more for it to have rogue with it. I definitely like having it with a mix of other X-Wings or other. Often I have like some A-Wings to leap ahead, tie it down, and then later on, the Rogue Squadron is going to go in there and take it out. It's very useful. Before you get an X-Wing, if you have 1 extra point, go ahead and get Rogue Squadron instead. Number 4 is X-Wing. It's a great heavy hitter for squadrons with that 4 anti-squadron dice. The bomber command center makes that red die much better, but still that bomber title is very useful, especially for certain objectives as well as certain admirals like you had Godana. Escort is also very important when you're defending other heroes like Jan and other kind of synergies that you could have with it. It's a great, well-rounded fighter for only 14. Number 5 is the E-Wing. It's essentially an improved X-Wing, but more expensive. It's speed 4, so it's a little bit faster. Same 4 blue dice, however, it has snipe 3, and that allows you to fire at distance 2 rather than distance 1. It's 15 points, but with so many ships and squadrons having counters and all these other kind of things, and especially against Imperial players that may have Dengar and Howl Runner that may like increase their counter, it's good to throw 1 or 2 of these in with the mix just so that you can have maybe your A-Wings or your X-Wings tie them down right next to it, but you have these focus on the ones that have counter and to save your ships from taking unnecessary damage. Number 6, I have Green Squadron. Green Squadron is the semi-unique A-Wing squadron. It has the exact same stats, 5 speed, 4 hull, black anti-ship dice, 3 anti-squadron dice, but it's a bomber. It reduces its counter by 1 and it increases its price by 1, so it's speed 12. But if you think about it, It's just a speed 5 bomber, and it can be easily mixed in with other A-wings. Whenever you have a bunch of A-wings, just go ahead and throw one green squadron in there. What you could do is when they leap up to a ship, have the ones that are not green squadron do the first few rolls and have them chip away at that shield, and then when that shield is there, go ahead and have green squadron go in and be able to do that 2 damage and hopefully a critical. Well, if it's 2 damage, then it has to be critical. But just think of it as a speed 5 bomber and how useful that is. And counter 1 isn't nearly as good as counter 2, but it's still something. I wish the Y Wings had counter 1. Next at number 7 is going to be the classic Y-Wing. It's 10 points, so pretty darn cheap. Speed 3, so it can keep up with the X-Wings and Jan. 6 hull, very durable, and it has a black anti-ship dice, and it's a bomber. Yeah, it's heavy, so you don't lock down other ones, but you don't want to lock down with a Y-Wing anyway. And the 2 blue anti-squadron isn't to talk home about, but it's a bomber. That's what it's there for. That 6 hole is going to allow it to get through. Team it up with some X-Wings and Jan. It's until recently the cheapest Rebel fighter. It's definitely really useful, and that's why it's number 7. Number 8 is another bomber, and it is a Scurrg H-6 Bomber. It's essentially a faster B-Wing. It has very similar stats. It has a blue-black, and it's a bomber. It has grit, though, which is useful, and speed 3 instead of speed 2. But it is 16 points, so it is pretty expensive. So we're getting into the ships that really aren't nearly as good as the ones I mentioned in the top 5 and the top 6. Next one is the Lancer class Pursuit. We're getting into another bomber. It's speed 4, 4 health. So it's very fast, but it's not nearly as durable as some of the other bombers that we've been talking about. It has that black anti-ship dice. It's a bomber. It has grit, and it has rogue. So it's 15 points, but you just got to think of it as a rogue bomber that can hold a little bit of its own against other squadrons with the 3. I don't see it being used in huge numbers because you only get so many of them in the pack, but I still think it has a decent place to continue using. Number 10 is the VCX 100 Freighter, which is essentially the class of the Ghost. It's very useful for certain objectives, so it's number 10 overall, but it could easily be 3 or 4 if you're choosing your objectives. Relay is really useful, particularly if you're using GR75 as your activation mechanism, because each one of them only activates 2, but they're really cheap and they can actually reuse the same VX 100 freighter multiple times. And the strategic option allows you to move those objective tokens is very useful, again, if you're playing one of those matches. So this isn't a useful ship for all situations. It's only useful if you're planning on having GR75s or other smaller vessels activate through the VC100 or depending on your objectives. So it could be very useful, but in most situations not. So it wouldn't fit in every fleet, like I think a X-Wing or a A-Wing could always improve any fleet. Number 11 is Dagger Squadron, which is the unique B-Wing squadron. This is essentially a more anti-squadron focused B-Wing. It has a black die mixed in with it. It has Swarm, so you can re-roll one of those die. It still has the main downfall of a B-Wing, of which it's speed 2, but that Swarm and that black die can make it pretty dangerous, so you can mix this in with other bombers, and if you do get engaged with a lot of squadrons, you just have this one go first and hopefully freeing up so that the other more bomber focused ones can go after the ship. I'm going to do these last few a little bit quicker. So the B-Wing, it's powerful. And that blue-black is great. 14 is a relatively fair price, but speed 2. But under certain combos, it can be really useful. Like if you're going to be able to activate it a second time using various other upgrades, or if you have torn far in order to re-roll a die. I don't see that many of them. I don't use them all that often, but they do have their use. The Z95 Headhunter. I'm just not a big fan of the Headhunter Squadron. It's so cheap and it so flies in the face of the normal Rebel strategy of having a few better ships than the Imperials, and then this completely It's worse than a TIE fighter. It's only speed 3. It only has health 3. The 3 anti-squadron dice of red is like really finicky. I guess that swarm helps, but not that many things have swarm in the rebel side. It's actually this and Dagger Squadron are the only one. So I would just say get an A-wing, and it'll be so much better than such a fragile thing that doesn't even have counter. Next is Gold Squadron. I really don't see the point of Gold Squadron. Losing heavy isn't that big of a deal to me. I don't see it being worth 2 points. And rolling 2 blue die against a ship rather than 1 black, I don't see that much of a difference. The damage output is actually going to be pretty similar. I guess you'll be a little bit more accurate, but for 2 extra points, I wouldn't get it at all. The next one is the Hawk 290. It's actually a pretty decent thing. Intel is very useful, has 4 hull, 12 points. It's actually not that bad of a thing on its own. However, Jan is so much better at 7 points more. Yeah, it's expensive, but her text ability is just infinitely better, and she has more anti-squadron and has a black die instead of a blue die. She's just so much better than this, and you really only need one ship that has intel in order to have that be your strategy. And the last one is the YT 1300. I have actually played against this a handful of times. I guess that 7 hull is really appealing, but I really don't find counter 1 all that useful. It's speed 2. Yeah, it has escort. It does play like a role and just to have it absorb a lot of hits, but it just doesn't hit enough. I would rather have like a mix of A-wings and X-wings rather than having 1300. So maybe it works for certain people, but it just doesn't work for me. And something that I should mention is what these unique squadron updates to existing squadrons that are usually 1 point more in a regular tournament game, they're not that big of a deal. They're not that much better. However, you're doing the Carillion conflict. That advantage of having it be considered a unique is really useful because then it can get veteran status. I would just like to add that caveat. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to go ahead and do another one for the heroes of the rebels. I hope this has been helpful. Where do you agree with me? Where do you disagree? What would you put in your top 5? I think that's really what I'm trying to get the gist at is like which ones are really useful and why are they useful. So I hope this has helped you out. Goodbye, everybody.